Hi, good evening. Today is election day, finally, here in Brevard County and Florida. And tonight, here on FloridaToday.com, we will be analyzing the results of Brevard County races. I am Isadora Rangel. I am Florida Today's engagement editor, and I will be your host this evening. Of course, I could not analyze tonight's results without the help of three local experts who know quite a bit about Brevard County politics. And let me introduce my guests to you before we begin. They are Kendall Moore. He is a local lawyer and a Democrat. Kendall, welcome.
Thank you, Isadora.
Kendall has been involved in local politics for quite some time. Also with me tonight is Chris Muro. He's a political science professor at Eastern Florida State College, and he's also an avid observer of local, state, and national politics. Welcome, Chris.
Good to be with you all.
You might remember 2 years ago when we did a live stream just like this one, we had Kendall and Chris, and now we have a new guest. Eric Hoppenbrouwer is the executive director of Business Voice, a political action committee that advocates for the interests of the local business community. And he's also a member of Civility Brevard, which is the Florida Today project. Eric, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Isadora. I'm really excited about the conversation.
So it is 7:02, which means polls closed exactly 2 minutes ago. And I think we'll start seeing the results trickle in pretty quickly. But I want to talk about turnout because there's so much talk about mail voting and whether people feel safe sending their ballots via mail. So let's start by taking a look at what turnout has been so far. And Eric, before we started the live stream, you and I were talking about the differences between how Republicans and Democrats have voted so far. And I'm going to share my screen here with everybody. So what do you guys see so far in turnout? And I understand these are not complete results yet.
So Isadora, I checked it at about 6:20, and that's obviously about 40 minutes before close of the polls. But the turnout for each type, mail ballots, 58%, early 13%, and election day, 29%. But what was odd is the difference between the parties or an MPA vote in terms of the different types of voting. Republicans in a majority voted at the polls either early or election day, but both the Democrats and the MPAs by 71% of the votes voted by mail. So I think it has a lot to do with COVID-19 and what the president has been saying about early voting, or at least mail-in voting recently, and that's really what we're seeing.
Yeah, we're seeing here 31,000 Democrats voted by mail and 28,000 Republicans. I mean, as a Republican, Eric and Kendall and Chris, please feel free to chime in. What are you hearing? Are people really concerned about voter fraud when it comes to mail voting? And is this a testament to how much influence the president has over Republicans?
Well, I would say, if I could, there's definitely been a partisan divide over the COVID-19 and, how real it is, or, what the effect is. And so I think you're seeing, more Republicans going and voting in person, kind of defying the idea that we have to be isolating, while Democrats and even some of our NPA folks decided to go the mail-in way. So I think there's definitely a partisan divide there. There pretty much is on everything these days, and even on how we're going to cast our ballot. I also think it was a good point that there's a lot of talk about voter fraud and whether or not mail-in votes are counted accurately. And so I think both of those factors played into what we see here as far as the breakdown tonight.
Yeah, and actually, I'm telling you, our supervisor of elections is pretty quick. I think we're already seeing some results. And let me share my screen with everybody here. Just give me 1 second. Okay, and so we're seeing here Bill Posey is ahead of Scott Kane in the Republican primary for Congress. That's District 8, which includes Brevard and Indian River counties. Let's begin with that race since it's right at the top. Posey has been our congressman for, I want to say 12 years or so, but I might be wrong here.
No, that's true. 2008, right?
Yeah, pretty established guy in the Republican Party. Scott King was not a very well-known guy. He's from Vero Beach. Indian River County represents a much smaller portion of this district. I mean, what did you guys make of Scott Kane? And Eric, I want to hear from you as a Republican. What do you know? But also, Kendall, feel free to chime in as well.
Well, Isadora, Bill Posey is a known quantity here in Brevard. He's worked really hard, especially for conservative causes. And Scott Kane, obviously really new, but he only really stood on one issue, and it had to do with one bill that Bill Posey sponsored. So there wasn't a lot of other information that we learned about Scott Kane.
Yeah, and I want to jump again. These are very preliminary results, but I want to jump to Florida House District 53, which includes Southern Brevard. The incumbent in that race is Randy Fine, and he's been quite a divisive figure and controversial figure in local politics. There's a Republican challenging him, Marcy Adkins, and he's way ahead of her so far. Any surprises here, especially given how nasty this campaign became?
I'm not surprised. Kendall, I'm sorry. You go right ahead, my friend.
I was just going to say, Isadora, I think that's been one of the most interesting races this cycle. Not only lots of regular campaign communication, just lots of talk amongst voters, about that particular race. And there's been lots of sideline activities, even outside of just the traditional candidates. I mean, campaign consultants and, press conferences and just all kinds of outside crazy things in that race. And so very interesting so far to see Randy Fine in the mid-60s and Marcy Adkins in the mid-30s so far. Looks like what has reported already would be the vote by mails. So it'll be very, very interesting, particularly pointed out earlier by Eric, that many of the Republicans turned out on election day. It will be very interesting to see if those results hold just as strong as we continue through the night and the election day results come out in that particular race.
And Eric, I think 2 days ago when we were, go ahead, Chris, I'll let you chime in first.
No, I was just going to say, so far what we're seeing though is the old adage, the power of incumbency. Now in recent years, there's been some, people saying that maybe incumbency is becoming a liability, but not tonight. So far, what we're seeing, Thad Altman, Randy Fine, Bill Posey doing well in their primary challenges, and incumbency remaining an asset, not a liability tonight so far.
Yeah, and again, for the viewers, these are very early results. These are definitely, we don't know if these results will hold up. So we're discussing the results as they come in. And but Eric, 2 days ago when we were preparing for this, we were talking about Florida House District 53. And again, we're talking about the soul of the Republican Party. And for those who are not completely familiar with this race, Marcy Adkins has campaigned largely on the Second Amendment and also on the First Amendment. But she has made a big deal about the incumbent Randy Fine voting for the Parkland bill, which included a couple of gun control provisions. And do you think that worked with Republican voters? And talk about what you mean by the soul of the Republican Party as well.
So let me first talk about the soul of the Republican Party. I think here in Brevard in particular, Florida as a whole, we're growing. There's a lot of people coming to the state and to our county. And so when you have a lot of people coming into a community, you have different ideas. And here in Brevard, since the Republicans have almost a 50,000 registered voter lead on Democrats, you get a lot of different ideas and people. And so, Randy Fine, we endorsed him, Business Voice did, because for one, he has an over 90% average in terms of his voter record from organizations like the Florida Chamber. So when it comes to business issues, he is definitely a sure vote for the business community. However, if you're in the local Republican Party like the executive committee, there's a lot of talk about the Constitution and a lot of issues revolving around First and Second Amendment. And so a lot of the base was definitely very unhappy with some of the votes that Mr. Fine had, especially the Parkland bill is the number one bill that folks were upset. And here in Brevard, we love our firearms. We love our Second Amendment. So I was interested to see what would happen there, because it was kind of a toss-up. As Kendall talked about, I think sometimes when different events, press conferences, and consultants becoming the center of a race, you just have no idea what's going to occur.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to also talk about, you mentioned Business Voice endorsed in this race. I would just want to mention that Florida Today's editorial board, of which I am part, also recommended candidates in Brevard elections. District 53 was the only race in which we decided not to recommend anybody because we saw a lot of problems with both candidates. Randy Fine's divisiveness and some of the statements he has made, which you can go back and read all of our stories. But there was also an issue with Marcy Atkins, and we felt that she didn't allow anti-Semitic comments, but she didn't really disavow them as strongly as we would have hoped when somebody posted something on her Facebook page. And she said that it should be condemned, but it should not be removed. But we felt that during our forum, she didn't use that opportunity to really say that she does not that she will not support anti-Semitism or any anti-Semitic comments posted on her social media. So go back if you want to read those. They're at floridatoday.com. But I want to go back to District 53 because that's obviously a race that everybody is watching. But I want to focus now on the school board. District 3, which is mostly Southern Brevard, it includes Satellite Beach and Indialantic and other parts of Southern Brevard. That is a nonpartisan race, which has taken a really partisan flavor. And let's talk about the two candidates. And are we sharing my screen now? If I can just show you what the preliminary results are here. So we see the incumbent, Tina Deskovich, is behind Jennifer Jenkins. Again, nonpartisan race with a lot of partisanship. The local GOP was behind Tina, and the local Democratic Party put a lot of effort trying to elect Jennifer Jenkins. It seems like so far, and again, very, very early results, that Jennifer is ahead. Fellas, what do you make of this?
Well, I think this is shocking so far. Tina is considered, a favorite of many conservatives in Brevard County. And she had some, financial backing, and I think a lot of people were not expecting to see at least what we're seeing so far with these early preliminary results.
I have to disagree with Christopher on this one. That goes exactly to the mail-in ballot differentiation between Democrats and Republicans. Probably what we'll see is the votes for Republicans and for Tina just kind of continue to roll up as the election day votes get tallied.
Yeah, and again, these are only early voting and mail ballots, correct?
Well, that is true. That is true. But when you've got a almost 20-point variance, are there that many votes that are outstanding that are going to see a major shift in the eventual outcome? And I don't think. I mean, at this point, I think it can tighten, but I think it's definitely the wind is at Jennifer's back right now.
I would at Isadora, kind of following up on what you referenced earlier. Eric mentioned it. This has been one of the most interesting races this cycle, albeit nonpartisan. I think both parties were probably more vested in this particular race than anything else. And it's also got an interesting dynamic since it is in South Brevard. The city of Palm Bay also had the mayoral race and the city council races on the ballot at the same time, driving likely some higher turnout in the farther south end of the county, which presumably some of those Palm Bay votes may benefit Jennifer Jenkins as it goes along. I do agree that you'll likely see some tightening just based upon the turnout models, but that is a fairly large lead going forward. We will see tonight, I think one of the big interesting issues for tonight after this is over and we break down how did the early vote look compared to the vote by mail, compared to the election day. We've been debating with pollsters for a very long time, not only who's coming, but how they're going to allocate themselves in those various categories as people prepare for November. And I think this particular school board race specifically is going to tell us a lot about what we're going to see.
And Ken, I'm interested in what do you know about the Democrats' ground game in District 3? Because we know that, Democrats hold they have no people elected in partisan races, but they've done relatively well in nonpartisan races, such as for school board. What is the ground game for them in a district like this? I mean, are they working really hard, knocking on doors? I mean, and with the pandemic, are they even able to do that? Any idea what it's looking like? What are they doing for somebody like Jenkins, which, she could win tonight's election, although it's too early.
Yeah, I tease with many of my Republican friends and colleagues about this, and I think the facts are clear. There are two things Democrats in general, and specifically the Democratic Party in Brevard, have done very, very well, and even outpaced Republicans. One of them is obviously carrying on from the Barack Obama campaign days. The Democrats' ground game has consistently been solid, and not only that, has continued to grow. There were some worries when COVID came as to whether or not the Democrats would have the capability and capacity to touch the doors. But in that school board race, I think you saw both Jenkins and Deskovich hit the ground pretty hard. So that was part one. But part two, which I think you see on your screen right now, the Democrats are very solid in the vote by mail chase. We always talk about that. When you are catering to a person who's going to vote by mail, that's a person with a ballot sitting on their kitchen table, and the dynamic of communicating with that person is drastically different than communicating with somebody who's going to vote on election day. And I think the Democrats certainly have been able to manifest those two things this time. Maybe not touching as many doors, more literature than actually knocking on doors. But I think from what you see in the vote by mail results thus far, they obviously have done very, very well in the absentee chase.
Yeah, and I just want to update you guys. So I just received an email from our reporter Alessandro Morazzi Sassoon. He just emailed us saying that Fine has declared victory. Randy Fine has declared victory in District 53. I'm looking at the website. Is it too early? I see 0 of 37 precincts reporting. I think so far we're only looking at mail and early voting turnout. I mean, is it too early for him to be calling, or does that make sense to you guys?
Well, again, with a 30-point variance, are there enough votes out there where they're going to be that lopsided that they would shift over and turn the outcome in a different way? I think it's very unlikely. So I think right now, Randy Fine, I think Thad Altman, Bill Posey, I think we can, with pretty strong certainty, say that those races have been decided tonight already.
Yeah. I think a lot of people were expecting that race to be closer, and I think because there was so much turmoil in that race, am I wrong to assume that? I mean, it was probably one of the nastiest races I have seen in recent years, at least in local politics, not talking about national, but there was a lot of back and forth between the two. What did you guys make of this? And I mean, is this something that is healthy for the county?
Well, I would say the Second Amendment, just briefly, I think the Second Amendment issue, was overhyped here. I mean, obviously Thad Altman voted for the Parkland bill, as did Randy Fine. Matt and I, tried to make that an issue. I saw ads online from gun rights groups, calling Thad Altman out and on that vote. And obviously tonight that didn't resonate with Republicans in Brevard County, who, I wouldn't classify as liberal country clubs Republicans. So I think that issue was overhyped, overplayed, and it didn't work here tonight.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that the Parkland bill included funding for mental health. It included funding for school security, for SROs or the Guardian program. It wasn't just a gun control bill, even though some conservative groups have definitely, like I said, have been trying to frame it as such. But we will go back to District 53 probably, but now I want to move on to Palm Bay. We have a pretty tight race for mayor there. Let's find that here. So right now, Kay Mirage and Rob Medina are pretty much neck and neck. He has 44 and he has 41%. Palm Bay is a city with a lot of issues, including some issues with the management of the city. What does this race mean for that city? And it is the largest city in Brevard County.
I think regardless of what you think, Isadora, the current council and the current management really has had to tough it out through this campaign because most of the candidates took an anti-incumbency, current city perspective, which can always be a challenge that you got sitting people attempting to govern, and the entirety of the campaign is about, what would we do differently? I had a chance to go to one of their forums not too long ago, and nearly all of the questions coming from the audience is what you would do differently. I mean, I think clearly we've talked about it before. Some of the most opportunist places for Democrats in Brevard exist in the South, and that's District 3, District 5 of the County Commission, and House District 53. And so I was interested to see whether or not these local races were going to draw out a number of Democrats. You mentioned the mayoral race. Rob Medina outspent Kay Muro quite a bit in that race, seemed to have a very professionally run campaign, lots of big notable names that were a part of the folks that endorsed him. And it looks like you've got almost a heads-up race, currently 41-44 in that Muro versus Medina. So I think it's going to be very interesting to watch that particular race. And then it looks like it's shaping up to be pretty close in that additional city council seat as well.
Yeah, let's not call the mayoral race yet.
That was pretty close.
And just, can we talk about the candidates there? So Rob Medina works for Congressman Bill Posey. Kay Muro she's kind of new on the political scene, but I assume she's a registered Democrat, even though this is not a partisan race, correct?
Yeah, she is a registered Democrat, and I know that there were some challenges early on, particularly with one of the candidates that dropped out and did not qualify. As you know, even if parties happen to get involved, when there are two from the same party involved, typically the party will stand down. And so if tonight it shows, as it's appearing to go, that Kay and Rob do make it to November, I think that's another place, just like you saw the focus on Jennifer Jenkins, that you will see the party focus heavily. The other interesting part about the Democrats in the South is they've got the overlay. I mean, there are going to be city council races, county commission races, state house races that are far more competitive in the South end, which you don't see central and north. And so it will be very interesting to watch where the Democratic Party focuses their resources. But if I had to guess today, there will be quite a bit focused to the South.
That's very interesting. And in the South, we have also Rangel Fines, District 53. And if he wins tonight, he will face Democrat Phil Moore in the general election, which he did 2 years ago, and he defeated Moore. So, but I want to go back to the school board race, and let's go back and check what it looks like right now. Jennifer Jenkins is leading with 59%. Tina Deskovich, the incumbent, has 40%. And also, I just want to make a note of school board District 4, where the incumbent, Matt Susan, is leading by a wide margin. He has almost 73% of the vote. That's very expected. I didn't see his opponent, David Worrells, really campaigning, but it seems like campaigning hard has so far been paying off for Jenkins. We'll see if she can hold that advantage. But if Jenkins in the end is the winner in this race, we know this is a nonpartisan race, and I always try to make that point time and time again, but we live in very partisan times. But if she is on that board, what does that mean for the school board? What does that mean for the Brevard school district?
Well, that means that there's going to be a philosophical change, I think, at the board, Isadora. There'll be, I think, one MPA or two MPAs, or essentially it'll be split Democrat, Republican, even though we know it's a nonpartisan position, and one MPA. As Kendall noted earlier, the union will have probably a little bit more of a leg up in terms of their negotiations for benefits and compensation, and you'll probably see more policies like the mask mandates and other types of cautious policies when it comes to COVID-19.
Yeah, and let me tell you, I hosted a forum for that race, and it was probably the best and forum and I'm talking because there were so many rebuttals. Those two candidates could not be farther apart on everything, especially on whether to reopen schools. Jennifer Jenkins really has criticized the board for reopening schools and for not doing more for teachers. Tina has been very solid on fiscal issues, and she's very pro reopening schools. And one of the arguments she made was about kids being left behind, because obviously there's a lot of inequalities when you keep kids at home learning from a computer. I thought that was fascinating. And I was just watching a Facebook ad by Jennifer Jenkins a few days ago, and I don't know who created that ad, but it was pretty good. And it was her. She would remove a mask and say, "My opponent voted against mandatory masks at schools." I mean, do you guys think that COVID is a big issue in that race because it affects schools so much? It's probably, the topic that people are talking about right now.
As a parent, Isadora, and having the decision in my house for my child who's a high school junior, trying to decide go or not go to the school. I think COVID is a big situation. I think the kids really miss their friends and they really miss school, but there's a tinge of them being scared and concerned as well. And so it's a very unique to do. I think you brought up in this race both Jennifer Jenkins and Tina Descovich, very, very knowledgeable on the issues, but very, very different, like you said, on where they're focusing. You mentioned the teachers union. The teachers union who did support Tina Descovich in the past seemed to be all in on Jennifer Jenkins on this particular one. And so in the future, where you have things like teacher compensation, I think Jennifer Jenkins works for the school board, but her husband is a teacher. And what we had for a good long time, Misty Belford, the John Craigs, even the Tina Descovich, those were parent-driven initiatives when they ran, and really Jennifer Jenkins ran this time on the fact of being a school board employee and or being, in the family of a teacher. And right now, much of the polling that we see, teachers are ranking very, very high. Interestingly enough, when people had to educate their kids at the end of last semester, or maybe the beginning of this one, the respect for teachers, who they are, what they do, that kind of thing seemed to rise. And I think Jenkins tried her best to play on that issue.
I would also, if I could follow up with what Kendall's saying, recent polling has showed that overwhelming majority of parents are opposed to reopening schools for this upcoming semester. And the only problem, though, is, and I've talked with a few members of our school board about this, at Eastern Florida State College, in the past 6-7 years, we've seen 7-8% enrollment growth in online learning over the past 6 or 7 years, maybe 1.5% to 2% on the actual physical campuses. So that has been, a trend in higher education for a number of years. The problem is the Brevard County School District is not ready. They're not equipped to transfer to an online format. Their learning management systems are way behind the times. They're the faculty, the teachers are not trained, and they're just not ready to do and deliver high quality online content. So I think there's an important dichotomy there. But if you look at the polling, most parents do not want the schools to be reopened.
And I'm going to add to that, because I've been tracking the returns here. So this election night return is kind of surprising, because as a Sunday night, after all of the early voting had ended, the Democrats only had a less than 2-point advantage in terms of turnout. So in that race, so that 19-point spread is really surprising. So obviously COVID-19 is a nonpartisan issue. It crosses party lines. I think it has to do with the parents' issue, as Kendall kind of alluded. It's a personal decision that's affecting people regardless of their party affiliation.
Absolutely. And I always wonder too, like we're people who follow politics, and sometimes I think we might be overestimating the partisanship in these nonpartisan races, that maybe people are looking at the candidates as candidates and voting on issues versus whether this person is backed by a particular party. I mean, again, it's very hard to know what voters are thinking. But I want to mention that Tina seems to be closing the gap a little bit, I think. Jennifer right now has 54.4. Tina has 45.5. But again, 30 out of 36 precincts reporting. And I'm not able to do math on the spot like that. So, but it's still a pretty good advantage.
That's still a very, very sizable lead for Jennifer Jenkins. I don't know. Are the voters that sophisticated?
Yeah.
That they're voting on these nonpartisan elections. They come in with, I mean, one of the most important pieces of information that a voter has is a candidate's party affiliation. We're taking that away. The most important piece of information a voter has, especially in sub-presidential elections, where most voters know almost nothing about those candidates, and we're making these all nonpartisan. I'm here to pose the question: is this the best way to run an election system? And I would say absolutely not.
You mean a two-party system or having nonpartisan?
A nonpartisan election, removing the information from the ballot for voters to know what party these candidates are affiliated with. That is the most important piece of information most voters have, and we're taking that away from them. The wisdom of nonpartisan elections, I would say, is lacking.
I'm going to say I disagree with that, but I want to know what Kendall and Eric think. It's obviously you're partisan people, so.
Well, you know, I think you see many of the other races taking, you know what I mean, the clear partisan trend on some of the other ones. On this particular one, I do think not just party, but I have a joke with the clients sometimes. When it comes to kids and animals, it causes people to think differently. And when it comes to school board related issues, people can latch on to anything. And this is the best example that we have. Safety a year ago meant Parkland. Safety today means COVID. People haven't been talking about whether there's a fence or a shooter or guns or how many resource officers there are. We've been talking for 6 months about what does my school being clean actually mean. And so I think that when you target parents, and I'll go back to what Isadora said, I don't know who made that particular ad for Jennifer Jenkins, but I think it had, I don't know what I saw it the other day, 7,000 views. It had, if you've seen it, no audio, and it was the words written on the individual masks as she took them off. I think parents are highly concerned about that particular issue. And hey, look, it was a hot issue on the school board. It took them multiple meetings of very serious debate to make some decisions about, you know what I mean, whether or not there were going to be masks and what the protocol would look like. Where I do think Chris has a point. This was a race, albeit nonpartisan, where both people were very happy to be very clear about the party, where they stood, and to be clear about how they thought the school board might move to the left or to the right, depending on who was elected. And so considering that, Chris, I'm not sure I'm ready to throw them out, but I do think that there were more things than party at play in this particular race.
Oh, absolutely. I agree, Kendall. I think, as you put it, safety is the number one issue, especially when it comes to people's children. And unfortunately for the school board, with limited amounts of information and a pandemic that became partisan, unfortunately, they were going to make a lot of people unhappy and a lot of people happy with whatever decision that they make. And so I know that it was probably a hard decision for all five of them every time they had to choose whether or not that they have in school or masks. The mask mandate was definitely a difficult conversation. They had a lot of public comments on both sides that was very compelling. I actually was touched by one of the commenters said that her child is hearing impaired. And so when someone has a mask on, she has a difficult time understanding what's going on, what's being said. So either side, it was just going to be a difficult vote. I'm just surprised that, like I said, again, by the turnout, how it's shaping in terms of the early returns, because obviously partisan people in the business understand that in Brevard now, the culture is that the parties are getting involved in nonpartisan races, including at the city level. And so their job, as they see it, is to bring out the base. So in this case, there's another element that changed the way that the voters looked at this race. And I have to say that I know that when it comes to a partisan designation, it gives you a little piece of information, which is really important for the voters. But having something like the school board in particular, as it pertains to having everybody have an effect, being affected by it in terms of taxes and how the kids are educated, you got to have everybody have a voice.
Yeah. I mean, for those viewers who are not too familiar with what the school board has done, but we're talking about School Board District 3, the incumbent Tina Deskovich is roughly 9 points behind her challenger, Jennifer Jenkins. Tina Deskovich was one of 2 school board members who voted against mandatory masks when schools resume. Jennifer Jenkins has made a big deal about that in her campaign. She had a video posted online. So just a little bit of background for those who are just joining us. And again, I'm just going to say this before we move on. I really admire people who run and serve on the school board, because that is such a difficult job, because no matter, I think Kendall said, no matter what you do, you're going to be criticized, and you're talking about kids' lives. So, but again, these are elections and people are elected and they're going to be judged by the decisions that they make, obviously, but it's such a difficult job, and the salary is not very high. So these are people who I believe really want to serve their community. But we're obviously going to go back to School Board District 3, but I want to just go over the results that we have so far for those who are just joining us. And I want to start again with U.S. House District 8. That district also includes Indian River County and East Orange. So the results that you're seeing on screen actually only show results for Brevard, but Bill Posey has a pretty substantial advantage. He is the incumbent, really well-known figure. I think Scott Kane, however, is going to be back when Bill Posey retires. And I've heard that is kind of the rumor going around, that this was kind of a practice run for him. So when Bill Posey retires, and there's a rumor every election year that he will be retiring soon, although that hasn't happened. I mean, have you guys heard the same thing about Scott Kane? He's obviously a guy with a pretty incredible resume. He's an Air Force veteran, was in the Air Force, I believe, for 30 years, very high ranked. What are you guys hearing about Scott Kane and what his political aspirations are?
Well, I think he'll be back, but he's going to be going up against Mike Herodopoulos, Thad Altman, Randy Fine, John Tobiah. I mean, that primary is going to be, I mean, we're going to write a book about that primary when it happens.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, Chris. Come on back and stand in line. I mean, and that line's been forming for many, many years. And if you pay attention to the economics, there are large sums of money out there with existing or potential candidates, let me say that, waiting as well. So not to say Mr. Kane doesn't have a chance, but he certainly should pack a lunch if he's going to join that crowd.
Yeah, did I mention Debbie Mayfield? I think I left her out. Don't let me.
You got it in. I mean, he has great credentials, and I heard him once or twice talk about the issues involved with China and our national defense. There's no doubt he has a pedigree, but the question comes down to how do you campaign in Brevard County? It's kind of an interesting place where how you campaign matters, and the voters respond to how you campaign. This cycle, I mean, the fact that door knocking was heavily reduced, in particular as it goes all the way down the ballot, I mean, affected the way each candidate approached how they were going to touch voters or contact and communicate with them. I got a ton of mailers, and I know that most of the folks who are voting in these elections probably had more than they wanted.
Yeah, and I also wonder if Scott Kane's attacks on Bill Posey worked. As somebody just watching him as an opinion journalist, I don't think they were effective at all. So basically, Scott Kane had a few ads accusing Posey of not supporting President Trump. It's like saying Bill Posey is a liberal, and I'm like, okay, that is very hard to say that Bill Posey is a liberal. I think he's a member of the Freedom Caucus. He, I don't recall him ever taking a quote unquote liberal stance in his career. Didn't work. And the whole thing about Bill Posey, I think there was a bill related to calling the coronavirus the China virus. And I don't remember the details of that bill, but he voted for that bill, which was basically telling the bill was supposed to tell the president not to call the coronavirus the China virus. And he voted for that bill. And then Scott Kane was attacking him for it.
Bill Posey was the only Republican to vote for that. It was just a measure to censure
Exactly.
President Trump, to stop calling it, it was anti-Asian discrimination, to stop calling it the Kung flu or the Wuhan virus or whatever. Bill Posey was the only Republican to join Democrats in supporting that and telling Trump to stop using those kind of phrases. And so that was the heart of this criticism from Scott Kane. I think it's pretty empty. It didn't work, obviously, because Scott Kane's not going to the general election. And I think when it comes back in subsequent years, I think Bill Posey's endorsement in a primary is going to be very coveted. I don't think Scott Kane's going to get that.
Yeah, I also think so. The other thing that he brought up is that Bill Posey has been in Congress for too long, and he used to be for term limits, but obviously he's still running for re-election. So I don't feel that worked either, because when our editorial board was sitting down to decide who we were going to recommend, he just didn't make the point to us that Bill Posey should be voted out, except for the fact that he's been there too long. But I don't think that in itself is a reason for voters to get rid of somebody. And I think defeating an incumbent like that, I mean, that's not an easy task, but especially you got to bring something, right?
Well, they tried to do that with Dave Weldon, right? Remember, Dave Weldon broke his pledge to step down after, 8 is enough. And that didn't play out either, because Dave Weldon was sent back for an additional term as well. So,
yeah.
You could talk about that, Isadora, but I think where Kane went wrong, Chris talked about the power of incumbency, but he tried to redefine who Bill Posey was. And you can like Bill Posey or dislike Bill Posey, but most people are pretty clear where he stands on the issues. And so this attempt to redefine him, unless you're going to spend millions of dollars doing it, he's been pretty clear about where he stands on most issues. And so that was probably a step too far, and most people really didn't buy it.
Yeah. Very interesting. So let's move on to, again, let's go back to Florida House District 53, with 36 out of 37 precincts reporting Randy Fine has a 30% lead over Marcy Adkins. Wow. I thought he was going to win, but not by such a large margin.
Well, Isadora, he almost outspent her by about 2-1 as of not the latest report, but the one prior. He had spent $91,000 to her $54,000. And I know money isn't everything, but as I said earlier, when you can't knock those doors and use those volunteer hours, I mean, mailers, social media ads, and I mean, Mr. Fine had the gumption to do live videos from his hospital bed while he had COVID-19. So I'm going to give him points for that, because not only was it a chance for him to tell people about the disease, which is not really talked about much in Republican circles, but it tried to give everybody an understanding and education about what it feels like.
Yeah, he does. I mean, I'm going to tell you, he does a tremendous job with social media. I remember during the hurricanes, he was giving updates. I mean, that's very smart on his part, especially when during the quarantine, people are on social media a lot more because they're stuck at the house. So it's a smart move. And again, he has a Democrat in the November elections, Phil Moore. Phil Moore was not a very polished candidate back in 2018. Kendall, is he going to get more support? Is he going to get more money this time around? Or is he just a name on the ballot that Randy Fine is just going to cruise to victory in November?
I mean, I think he got 47% the last time, which is a good showing down there. And as I mentioned earlier, the construct and the numbers of the districts down south certainly trend more Democrat than they do central and north. But I mean, Chris talked about it, the power of incumbency. Randy Fine showed here tonight in this primary, and I'm sure he's going to have the same mentality coming into the general. The challenge for Randy are the demographics and makeup of the district. I know that Eric talked about, the 2-to-1 spending. I'm not in that district down south, so I didn't see any of the communication, but I have to assume that it was far more than 2-1 if you take into account any third-party activities or participation that came about in that race. That could probably take it easily to 4 or 5-1 in the communication, and that's going to be the challenge for Phil Moore. If he can't raise the funds and he's spent by a ratio of 4 or 5-1, that's going to be a difficult race for him, even though the demographics could be very reasonable for him.
Yeah. Eric, what do you think as a Republican?
Well, about the general election, I mean, we kind of saw what we're going to see in 2018. I've listened to Phil Moore. He is more polished, but he's holding on to, or he's standing up for the same positions. So the question is whether or not the voters have changed their minds. And as Chris and Kendall have talked about, I mean, we all know the power of incumbency. It's incredible, especially when it comes to Congress. I know I'm kind of flipping back to Congress, but it's funny. Congressional approval is all-time lows, but if you ask any voter, or they do ask voters about their own personal representative, it's sky high. So, I mean, I guess you could say that you could pull that all the way down to the state representative races. If you look at Mr. Fine's social media, he talks about fighting for Brevard, and many of the commenters on his threads appreciate the way that he goes about doing his politics.
Yeah, so I actually want to move on to Palm Bay, because now we're seeing, and if you can see it on my screen, we have the race for mayor. Kay Mirage was, I believe she was leading, or they were very close. Rob Medina now is leading with 45%. Let's talk, we already talked about the candidates, but let's talk about them again, because a lot of people don't know people running for these municipal races. So Rob Medina is more of an established figure, at least I think when it comes to name recognition. But Kendall, you're probably more familiar with them if you want to talk about them both.
Yeah, Mr. Medina has been around for quite some time, even though not elected, working for Bill Posey and being involved in and around politics. It is certainly a household name that many around the county and South County know. I think you can see from the ads that he ran and the things that he put together are very, very heavy on the military side and veterans. He's certainly very, very proud of his service in the military, and has consistently run on that both this time and the last time that he ran. Kay, again, a fairly new individual in the mix, a local business person in Palm Bay, also like most of the other Palm Bay candidates. Ran on change, ran on paying attention to the citizens, ran on having an open door, spent considerably less and raised considerably less than Rob Medina, so much of a grassroots candidacy there. But we saw a very, very close race tonight, within 1,000 votes, and the other two candidates in the single digits. And so I think that's going to be one of the races to watch come November, particularly in the city of Palm Bay, with both the people coming from seat 2 in this race, and they have additional seats that will also be on the ballot in Palm Bay.
Yeah, and by the way, for the viewers, in most municipal races, there's a runoff. So if nobody gets more than 50% of the votes, there's a runoff in November, which is going to be the case in this race for mayor. But I'm going to scroll down to the race for Palm Bay City Council, where Donnie Felix and Peter Filiberto, am I saying it right, are really neck and neck. Donnie is leading by less than a percentage point, and Peter is right behind him. What do we know about these candidates? Again, Palm Bay City Council is not something that I am too familiar with.
Similarly, so on this one, you did have a myriad of candidates. Obviously, 5. I think there were even 7 or 8 that originally got in, but they did not qualify. Donnie Felix, a big advocate in the Caribbean community, specifically in the Haitian community. Campaign hard, local business guy. Mr. Filiberto, actually, you may recognize the name. I think his father was previously the mayor in the city of Palm Bay, so carries some name recognition and name ID in that regard. Did see some alliances that he had in the business community out there, and so I think both of those are going to be very, very viable candidates going forward. And again, just like the mayor's race, another strong, solid shootout to come in November.
Yeah, and just a quick update. I just got an email from my newsroom here that in Florida House District 53, the challenger Marcy Atkins has conceded, so Randy Fine is declared the winner, I believe. So that's pretty much settled very fast. How this race has shaped up. But fellas, I want to talk about something that was really telling to me in the Palm Bay race for mayor was just the diversity of the candidates. We had, I think Rob Medina is Puerto Rican. And by the way, he said my name right during the forum, and I really liked it. So a lot of people don't say my name because I'm Brazilian, the way it's supposed to be said. So we had Kay, who was born in Jamaica, and Alfred, who's also born in Jamaica. I mean, Palm Bay is becoming such probably the most diverse city in Brevard County.
Well, it's our most populous area, and historically, Isadora, I mean, the property values have been pretty reasonable, and the development has been going on there quite a bit. But I think what's interesting about these races in particular is the diversity of opinion and viewpoint. Some people new to the political process, like Miss Crisp, and have come out in strong support of our president and really pulled that partisanship down to the municipal level. And it's just been interesting to watch as those candidates kind of wade through, telling the voters what they stand for, but maybe not explicitly saying what partisan party that they're a part of, because they don't want to, turn off any voters that they could get to vote for them. So I think it's been interesting to watch.
Yeah, very interesting. And I actually want to talk about judicial races, which are not the sexiest elections ever. But for the first time, I think I paid a lot of attention. So there were 4 races for 18th Circuit judge. And one of them had an incumbent. The other 3 were open seats. And by the way, this the 18th Judicial Circuit includes Seminole County. What I'm going to show you is only the results for Brevard County, and I'm going to do my best to get the results for the entire circuit. So let's look at Judge Scolara Ballou is ahead of Michael Bross. Steve Henderson is leading against Michael Peacock. Donna Gerner is leading against Mark Jones. Both Donna and Mark are from Seminole. Sam Bookhart is leading against Oscar. I don't know how to say his name. My apologies.
Hatsuing.
I am notorious for mispronouncing words, so please don't feel bad, Oscar. But let's talk about these races, because I saw, and if you were watching this, you probably saw a lot of yard signs for the candidates. You're probably wondering who these people are. So since we have a lawyer among us, Kendall, let's talk about the candidates, who they are, and kind of a little bit about the campaigns.
The judicial races are always unique in the sense that in addition to traditional campaign rules and regulations, there are other statutory rules and regulations as well as judicial and ethical canons that these candidates have to abide by. And so often there are things that they can't say or can't do, which tends to drive the public crazy. But ultimately, it does limit the conversation from time to time. I think you had a series of races this go around. Tisha Ballou, a brand new judge who was appointed previously by the governor, up for election the very first time against a longtime lawyer in Brevard, Michael Bross. Tisha Ballou, again, was from Seminole originally, now resides here in Brevard, running against Mr. Bross, a longtime lawyer. And again, it looks like that she is currently ahead 59-40. The other one, 2 other newcomers, Steve Henderson and Michael Peacock, their names had been in the mix quite a bit before in discussions about not only running for judge, as was the case this go around, but also gentlemen who have considered and or gone through the process with the Judicial Nominating Committee, which is the other mechanism for getting on the bench, going through that local process, and then ultimately a decision by the governor. And it appears Mr. Henderson, at least on the Brevard results, again, 73-26 thus far. Donna Garner and Mark Jones, that's a Seminole County seat. And when we say Seminole County seat, we're in the same circuit, but based in Seminole County. In full candor, Ms. Garner is actually a law school classmate of mine, and she happens to be up 60-40 tonight. And then last but not least, Sam Bookhart versus Oscar Hodesing. Oscar was a previously seated judge in this particular county and circuit. We've had some very expensive judicial races in the last few years. Lots of heavy self-funding. Not a lot of money spent by Mr. Hodesing this go around. Sam Bookhart has been on the ballot a couple of other times. Looks like he is up quite a bit in Brevard, 71-28. And you brought up diversity, and I think just as an FYI, both Sam Bookhart and Donna Garner, both African-American candidates, which successful judicial candidates, African-American in this particular circuit, can be somewhat of a rarity. And particularly if Mr. Bookhart is successful tonight, will be the first African-American from Brevard County to withstand a circuit-wide race and be successful. You did have Jim Perry, who served on the Florida Supreme Court, but was elected out of Seminole County. And so another potentially historic making night tonight for Sam Bookhart if the Seminole votes follow what we see here in Brevard.
Yeah, yes, the Seminole votes are pretty much the same as in Brevard. And Chris, Kendall, and Eric, I'm going to ask you to be on standby for a couple of minutes because I'm going to bring Alessandro Morazzi Sassoon, our investigative reporter, who is covering the Florida House District 53. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, the challenger, Marcy Atkins, has conceded to the incumbent, Randy Fine. Very quick results. Ale, welcome on the show.
Thank you. I mean, I think it was said before, this was a pretty quick result. Within minutes of the polls closing, Randy Fine declared victory. And I think he expected it. I think the Atkins camp was feeling pretty confident going into today, maybe expected more votes coming in earlier, getting a larger share of the mail-in vote, but clearly that didn't happen.
Yeah, and I think earlier I mentioned how nasty this campaign became. It's very hard for me to even remember all the things that happened, but can you kind of summarize the things that went on during this campaign? Because there's obviously a lot of animosity between the two candidates. If you can just recap the things that were brought up during the campaign.
Right. A lot to say in one breath. It certainly took a pretty personal turn in terms of the types of attacks that were being made. There were attacks, alleged against one's mother, against, there was claims even that Randy Fine was faking his COVID illness. Well, not, implications made in Facebook comments. And then, it was kind of all over the map. And I don't think anybody in recent memory can remember a race with such interesting twists and turns in terms of the types of attacks that were happening. I mean, there was, a lot of attacks on Marcy Atkins' campaign manager, Robert Burns. But at the end of the day, it seems that, whatever desired effect the attacks had in either direction evened out to a Randy Fine landslide. So
yeah, absolutely.
Not sure what the analysis is there. I'll leave it to you.
There's always that we don't know what voters are thinking or what they're following. We were just talking about that. It's so hard to get in the minds of voters. But I'm curious to know what has Randy Fine said, or what has Marcy Atkins said about these results tonight?
I mean, all I have is a brief statement from Marcy Atkins saying it was a great honor and pleasure to run this race. Thank you very much to all who voted for and supported me. We congratulate Representative Fine and wish him and his family the best. So, a very polite, succinct, to the point statement congratulating, Representative Fine for holding his position as the Republican choice for District 53. And, Randy Fine similarly took to Facebook to tell his supporters, and I can, read the statement to you all in a second. With early and absentee ballots reporting, I've doubled the vote of my opponent, winning 65-35. I'm so grateful to the Republican Party for standing with me as I keep fighting for Brevard. We now turn our attention to November, but given my record of bringing millions of dollars and changing policy to save the lagoon, exposing the culture of corruption within local government and fighting for you. Whether and how I have stood with you through the hurricanes or COVID-19, I am confident we will prevail again. So I think there you can see he's hitting on some of his trademark issues, the lagoon, he's sort of branded himself as a corruption fighter, and has the receipts to prove it in many ways. And certainly when hurricanes happen, he's been very active on social media as sort of being a megaphone, repeating public safety information, and with a pandemic, public health information. I think everyone to some extent was aware or followed his experience with the coronavirus, and for many that was a way of making it personal. So I wonder what effect that also has on voters, him being a constant presence. I think it's safe to say that Randy Fine is a Republican who has a lot of name recognition in the county, and that probably has an effect.
Ali, thank you so much. We're going to let you go back to your election duties, because now we're going to bring Dave Berman on. He is Florida Today's government editor, and he is covering two races tonight. The first one is for U.S. Congress, the District 8 race where Bill Posey seems to have won the race, and also County Commission District 3, which we have not talked about. So I want to begin with District 3. Incumbent John Tabaya is challenged in the Republican primary by Kathy Meehan, the mayor of Melbourne. What is the race looking like, Dave? Has it been called yet?
Yes, it's been called, and the incumbent has won. The John Tabaya is going to go on to the general election, so he won by a pretty big margin against Kathy Meehan, who's the mayor of Melbourne and could not seek re-election this year because of term limits. So she ran a pretty strong campaign, but John Tabaya had a lot of name recognition in the district and won by about, he got about 63% of the vote.
Yeah, versus 36%. What a landslide. And let me tell you, these are two Republicans, but they couldn't be farther from each other philosophically in their approach to issues. Explain who Commissioner John Tabaya is and who Kathy Meehan is.
Right. John Tabaya is known as a pretty conservative Republican and against tax cuts. And he's a little bit of a maverick in the Republican Party, where he sets his own agenda. And sometimes when the commission votes on items, he'll be the one no vote or the one yes vote on certain issues against four other Republican commissioners. So they're all five are Republican on the board, but he often votes differently than some of the other county commissioners.
Yeah, and Kathy Meehan is more of a moderate, I would say, right? So
yeah, I would say she's pretty moderate compared to John Tabaya, and he labeled her as more liberal than even moderate, but I think she's considered fairly moderate and pro-business. Her family owns a well-known office supply business in Melbourne, and she had a lot of name recognition in Melbourne, but the district includes a lot of other areas of Brevard County, like the South Beaches and Palm Bay and Barefoot Bay and the southern end of the county. So I think John Tabaya might have been a little more well-known in other parts of the district than Kathy Meehan was.
Yeah, are you surprised by the margin that he has won this race? I was actually expecting a closer race. Were you?
Well, I think I was expecting a little bit closer race. I think the polling that John Tabaya did showed that he would win the primary. It was pretty consistent. The results were pretty consistent with what he was expecting. But I guess I thought that it would be a closer race because Kathy Meehan has been mayor of Melbourne for 2 terms, and then she was a city councilor for 2 terms before that. So she was a pretty well-known candidate, and they both spent an amount of money on the campaign and also raised a similar amount of money from outside sources. John Tabaya did put $100,000 of his own money as a loan into the campaign, so that gives him a cushion for spending on the general election now, where he will be going up against the Democrat Sanjay Patel, who is a pretty well-known Democrat locally, had run for Congress 2 years ago and did pretty well in that race against Bill Posey.
Speaking of Congress, has U.S. House District 8 been called yet? Seems like Bill Posey has a pretty substantial advantage.
Right. He seems like he has an insurmountable lead. He's winning in both Brevard County and Indian River County. His opponent, Scott Kane, is from Vero Beach, which is in Indian River County, but still Bill Posey has the same margin of leading in both counties. And there's a small portion of the district that is in Orange County, where he's also leading. We just contacted the Kane campaign, and they said they're not conceding as of yet. They're waiting for the final results to come out. But I don't think there'll be any question that Bill Posey will win the primary and go on to the general election.
Okay. Dave, thank you so much for joining us. And now I'm going to switch to Eric Rogers. He is our education reporter at Florida Today, and he has the hottest race of the evening. Where's Eric? Hey, Eric. So, hey, welcome on our live stream. Let's talk about School Board District 3, where the incumbent Tina Descovich was challenged by Jennifer Jenkins. We were just talking about this, but let me pull this up so we can see where the race is now. So it seems like Jennifer Jenkins has defeated the incumbent Tina Descovich. This is the only upset of the night. We see 36 out of 36 precincts reporting. Eric, what do you make of this? What does this mean now for the school board?
Well, it sort of depends on who you ask. As far as in terms of issues and the policies the school board is making, Jennifer has come out as a very strong voice for teachers, particularly amid the COVID-19 pandemic. But also, there's not this race has been a little bit interesting because typically the school board District 3 race and school board races in general are nonpartisan. But this race has taken on a bit more of a partisan tone over the past couple of months, with each of the candidates being supported by local political parties, Tina Descovich by the Republicans and Jennifer Jenkins by the Democrats. So in that sense, there has been sort of a battle of political wills for the seat. There was some concern by the Republicans on the Republican side that a victory by Jenkins would strengthen sort of what they would call the liberal side of the school board. However, there's not really a quorum of school board members that sort of lean closer towards the left. The only other person on the board who would describe herself as a Democrat or a liberal, I believe, would be Cheryl McDougall. So this now adds Jennifer Jenkins politically to that side of the spectrum. However, both Jenkins and Descovich have come out saying that they don't govern based on their partisan politics. They govern based on their issues and on their values.
Yeah, and if the viewers are seeing School Board District 4, where the incumbent Matt Susan has won with 75% of the votes, definitely not expected. And Eric, I mean, have you talked to Tina and Jennifer? What have they said? I think this is a stunning result, given that in no other races there's been an upset like this.
I have not yet been able to hold of either Tina or Jennifer since the polls closed. I think they're both in the midst of their respective post-election parties at the moment. But we're going to keep trying and see what they have to say.
Great. So Tina and Jennifer, please call Eric back. And Eric, thank you for being with us. We'll let you go back, finish up your story. Make sure you go and read his story at floridatoday.com. Eric, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's go back to Eric, Chris, and Kendall. It seems like all of our local races are pretty much defined. Am I missing something? Any races that you guys want to talk about?
I just wanted to get in on this because I think you're right. I think everything's been pretty solidified here. But before we leave the judges,
Yes.
I think that the whole process of judicial elections is something that needs to be reformed. The idea that, to me, it's an oxymoronic term. Judicial elections, these are two things that should not be together because what we're doing is we're politicizing our judicial branch of government, which I think is a problem. The other thing is 9 out of 10 voters could not tell you what the jurisdiction of the circuit court would be as opposed to the jurisdiction of the county court. And so to have voters make the decision about who should be in these positions, to me, just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And a lot of these people that have been elected tonight are just perennial candidates. I mean, Stephen Henderson and Sam Bookhart. that have run over and over and over again, and they figure, well, if I try, numerous times, I'll at least be elected one of these times.
Correct. I mean, I sort of see your point, but also when you nominate judges, isn't that a political process as well? Because you obviously have a person who was elected through a political process nominating. I mean, is there a way not to make this political?
Well, I think Vermont has the best system. I mean, and this is a shocking thing. You'll never hear me say this about Vermont on anything else. Vermont has the ultimate system. And that is the governor, with the advice of a judicial nominating commission, makes an appointment. That judge will serve for a term of 2 years, and then to be reappointed, they have to appear before the state legislature, and they can only be removed with a supermajority vote. I think it's a perfect balance, checks and balances. I love it.
And by the way, that's similar to the process in Florida when there's a vacancy. But we know, for example, with the nomination of Judge Ballou, that there was some controversy there because the governor wanted her on the list. So, but that process does kind of exist in Florida, but it's just not when there's.
Oh, you get the merit retention. See, if it went to the legislature instead of this merit retention election business, I think it would be a much more, because these merit retention elections over the past decade, there's been, according to the Brennan Center, a 600% increase in spending on a merit retention election where there's a judge running against himself or herself.
Yes. All right, fellas, I think we're kind of ready to wrap up here, but I want to talk about turnout. And Eric, you've been following this closely. And let's look at turnout. Has anything changed since this morning and when we last talked about it in the beginning of our live stream? And I'm going to bring up my page here for you guys.
Well, Isadora, I looked up the last 2 years in terms of countywide turnout and tried to estimate what it would be this cycle. And it's actually up higher than my estimate by about 3%. But what I can say is every year, the primary turnout goes up about 2%. So I think what that's telling us is that voters are getting more and more interested in primary elections, probably because school board, I would say, one of the more important things that we vote on in terms of policymakers. So it's just, I mean, as a watcher of political stuff, I'm excited that people are getting into the process. I understand Chris's point on the judicial appointment versus democratizing that vote. I just think that it just shifts the political aspect to the executive versus having people vote. That's a toss up for me, but not to bring up the previous conversation, but turnout seems to be almost at 28%.
Isadora, the turnout issue for tonight. We talked at the very beginning about trying to watch the breakdown between mail, early, and election day voting, and Chris brought it up as soon as those initial early voting and vote by mail statistics popped out. Looked at the percentages of the lead. And like you, I'm not a mathematical guru, but when you start to look at the percentage of votes that were already in the box, and if you have a very strong lead, what percentage of the remaining election day votes you would have to win in order to come back or even overcome your opponent's early voting and vote by mail lead. I think the answer on that is now telling us that it's not going to be a Tuesday in November when this election is decided. It's going to be a 30-day window in early October when those vote by mail ballots hit the street. And for any candidate out there, the lesson should be, if you're waiting until early or election day, I mean, it could be a race that is far gone from you mathematically at that point. And as we saw tonight, those numbers held pretty strong. I think we saw Justin Pombay, Medina pull a little bit ahead of Kamara, but other than that, all the relative, scenarios stayed the same. Deskovich pulled a little bit closer as the election day votes came out with the Republican turnout, but still, I think the lesson for today is the strength of vote by mail. Both parties pushed it. The supervisor of elections pushed it, and it's going to be the difference maker in November, just like it was tonight.
That's a great point. And gentlemen, I think we're ready to wrap up here. But I want to thank you all for joining me tonight. Your insight is so valuable, and you guys brought different points of view to this conversation. And again, thank you for joining us. And by the way, Eric is going to be a father soon, so congratulations.
Congratulations, Eric.
Yep. We hope that it wouldn't happen tonight, and thank gosh I didn't get the phone call, so I was able to be present. So thank you so much.
Congratulations, and I'm sure I will see you back again in November. And again, thank you for all the viewers for joining us. If you want to check out the final results, go to floridatoday.com. Read our coverage, read our analysis of all these races that we just talked about. And thank you again for supporting Florida Today. And make sure that you do your homework for the November elections. And Florida Today will have plenty of material to help you make your decision. Have a good evening.